and get started. Welcome everybody to the November meeting of the Utilities Advisory Commission. We'll go ahead with roll call. I'll call out names in the order I've seen them on my screen. Vice Chair Siegel.
Present.
Commissioner Metz.
Present.
Commissioner Johnston.
Present.
Okay, and I am here as well, so we have a quorum. Hopefully Commissioners Smith and Scharf will be able to join us soon. We've received word that Commissioner Bowie is not able to come tonight. So as far as item number 2, agenda review and revisions, we do in fact have a revision to the agenda, which is when we get to new business, we have an additional action item regarding authorizing the use of teleconferencing for utilities advisory commissions during COVID-19. I'm guessing it'll take about 20 minutes. So we'll slot that in as the first item of new business, and then we'll proceed with the legislation item and the resiliency of single family homes item after that. So then at this point, why don't we go to oral communications? If there are any members of the public that want to address the commission on an item that is not on the agenda, now would be the time to do so. Oh, and there's Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Smith, can you unmute and just let us know you're here?
I'm here.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so then are there any members of the public indicating that they want to speak?
If anyone from the public would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand. There are no hands raised.
All right, then we will move forward. The next item is the minutes. We all should have received the draft minutes from last month. Are there any comments or proposed revisions on the minutes? Vice Chair Siegel?
Sure. I just wanted to revise at the very end of the minutes where we move to adjourn. It has the prior commission and not the current commissioners listed as those approving that we adjourn. So if we can update those to those who are present, that'd be great.
So that would be removing Commissioners Danaher and Jackson, but adding Commissioners Bowie and Metz, I think.
Correct.
And if I remember correctly, Commissioner Scharf had to leave early, so I don't think his name should be on there.
Right.
Are there any other potential revisions to the minutes? If not, then maybe we can have a motion to approve the minutes with those revisions.
I'll move to approve the minutes as revised. Second.
Thank you. Okay, quick roll call. Vice Chair Siegel.
Approve with the revision.
Commissioner Metz.
Approve with the revision, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnston.
Approved with the revisions.
Commissioner Smith.
Agreed.
And I approve as well. So the minutes are approved. I do not believe we have any unfinished business from our last meeting. So that brings us to the Utilities Director report. Director Batchelor.
Great, thank you, Chair Counsel and Commissioners. Afternoon. Couple things that I wanted to bring to your attention. On October the 19th, we had our first PSP shut off for our foothill customers up in the hills. We had gotten notice earlier in the day that there were going to be high winds in the hills and expected from 8 o'clock Tuesday night rolling up till about 4 in the morning on Wednesday. Just about midnight, the winds just were not going to curtail. Winds were between 28 and 30 miles an hour. We saw gusts up to about 42, 44 miles an hour during that period of time. And we made the decision to shut down that line. That impacted about 150 customers that's on that line because where the switch is located at, it is actually just a little bit lower than the foothills itself. But we felt that with the dry conditions, even though it wasn't a red flag that day, but with the dry conditions going up through that area and the heavy winds that just continue to be going on, we started monitoring at 6 o'clock in the afternoon or in the early evening. And we started seeing winds in the mid 20s, low 20s. But then, like I said, right around midnight, we've been tracking it for a couple hours that the winds were just not reciting and the winds were starting to pick up a little bit more. So we made the decision to shut those customers down. I did hear from some of the customers personally. They felt that, we didn't give them enough notice. And we should have given them a more time frame of when we were going to shut that down. And as I explained to them as to City Manager Shikata that this is a decision that we're going to have to make that is not going to be able to give a whole lot of warning when we're actually going to shut these customers down. One of the things that we are looking at is we're looking at our communication plan about how we can be a little bit more proactive on getting out information. Right now, we have a list of those 150 customers. We are emailing those customers when we had to go through this. We had been talking about maybe possibly putting together a text list so that we can text customers at the same time, that maybe we can let them know a little bit in advance that we're going to have to shut that line down. Like I said, it was 10 minutes to 12. And the other concern that I heard was that it was the length of the time it took us to restore. So we ended up restoring not till noon the next day. Part of that is that we actually need to do a physical walkout of that line. It's not going to happen at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. It's 15 miles up through the woods area up through there. And then when we actually went down and we actually looked at that, we actually had some tree branches laying across the lines that we had to remove. It's in an area where we can't get vehicles to every place. So we had to try to get some ladders and extension poles and try to knock some of these branches off the line portions of it. So it took us a little bit of time. Customers were not really aware and focused in that it would take us that long. They felt it would be just like an emergency outage where, we just fix the problem and then we turn it back up and get them power at that period of time. But we are going to do a little bit more on proactive way of communicating, as well as sending some emails out about how long to expect if there is this type of outage again. We're hoping that won't happen again, but we don't know what these wind predictions will look like. So it was our first one that we had done since we put together the PSP plan. So that, again, I think the thing is that, we're talking to customers as well as looking at the website, paloalto.org preparedness. That gives you more information about how to be prepared for outages, as well as there is a web page specific to PSP at cityofpaloalto.org outage information. So it's on the outage page for PSP. So that was the first item. Smart
Sorry,
energy.
quick
Yeah.
question. PSP stands for what? Public safety?
Yeah, public safety power shutoff.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sorry. We recently won the Smart Energy Provider Award, again, from American Power Association for the third year in a row. The Smart Energy Provider is recognized by public utilities for demonstrating leading practices in 4 key areas. mostly around smart energy program, energy efficiency, distribution engine energy programs, and environmental sustainability initiatives. So again, we're pretty proud to be able to receive this award, and we're going to continue to strive to make it even better in those areas. So we were quite pleased with that award, third year again. And then also too is that Palo Alto, as most of you would know, we've been talking about with Valley Water, that we're collaborating with them on potential sitting on a regional purifying water treatment facility at the Los Trencos plant in Palo Alto, which is at the end of the, I guess that would be the east side of San Antonio Road. And the facility will include a pump station, a transfer influencing, and a regional quality control plant from the Los Altos treatment plant site. And so Valley Water is currently designing the facility, and they're working on preparing EIRs and working on Palo Alto staff on leasing agreements and outreach on the permitting piece. And then they also have reached out to Palo Alto and also to the commission for offering a tour of the purifying center in San Jose. So if you'd like to set up a tour, we can set up a tour with the group, or you can go online to Valley Water and go to self-guided tour, and it'll show you a guide of the quality treatment plant that, a purifying plant that they have there in San Jose. A little bit of news on the water supply update. The State Water Resource Board imposed curtailments for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission to Tuolumne River diversions on August the 20th. The SFPUC is complying with those curtailments, but has also filed a lawsuit and is requesting health and safety exemptions for the entire service area. They were able to capture some storm water according with the water rights during the big October storm. The state board temporarily lifted the curtailment, and the Category 5 atmospheric river provided significant precipitation, but not enough to do during this whole drought bust. So we're going to probably need about another 6 or 7 of those to actually start seeing some huge increases in storage. So San Francisco PUC plans to declare a water supply emergency later this year, requiring 10% voluntary water use and restrictions system-wide, which will have an effect of Palo Alto. This level reduction would bring a regional water deliveries close to the 2015 levels, which was the lowest water levels that we've ever had for a drought. And then Palo Alto reduced water by 6.7% from the period of July 1 through October 31st in 2021 compared to 2020, July through October. Bills showed residential customers reduced an average of 9.3, while non-residential customers increased water usage by 5.1 compared to 2020. So, for example, the residential customers, like I said, they reduced about 4.4%, but our commercials, we'll have to work with them. There was actually a slight increases in that. So this is something that we're gonna have to work on. Also too, is that you might already have been gotten a phone call, but we're doing gas safety awareness phone surveys beginning this month. CPUs participating in this federal mandated gas overview awareness level, which is a nationwide program to access public awareness about gas safety. Residents will receive phone calls with requests to answer questions about their gas safety protocols, such as call before you dig. Do they have any knowledge around that? Do they know to help and prevent gas emergencies? Palo Alto customers and non-customers, including emergency response public officials, excavators will be randomly selected in a poll. And we thank you in advance if helping us meet our goal if you've been already, or you might be asked some questions around that. We're also doing public awareness plan for gas safety every year. We send out gas mailers for safety brochures to every customer, plus the stakeholders living near and working around Palo Alto. We also distribute those during the late August an early September timeframe. So we're going to try to coordinate this during this period of time. Those have already gone out, but like I said, this is just a follow-up so that seeing what on this national level where we rank from that. Also, too, is that Genie Home Efficiencies back in making personal calls to customers. As you know, this past year with the pandemic, we were only able to do virtuals, but now they are actually taking orders to actually meet customers face to face on their energy efficiencies, and that they are also taking and they can still provide energy efficiency tips over the phone if customers would like to save some money on their utility bills. It's the website again for their numbers and information is City of Palo Alto Efficiency Genie to schedule appointment during that time. And then last thing I'd like to cover just around SunShares. For the 6th year in a row, the city is outreaching partners with Bay Area SunShares, a solar and battery storage discount program administered by the Council of Climate Change. BC3 residents must register for discounts by November the 30th and sign installation contracts by December 31st of this year. As part of the role, Outreach Partner CPA will host a free virtual webinar on Tuesday, October the 26th from 6 to 7:30. There was about 90 participants at that virtual viewing. And the event went well with that, following up with some questions. As October 27th, Palo leads the outreach partners in signing contracts. We have 6 residents have committed to installing solar and battery storage already at this point, coming from that timeframe from October 26th. So about a week or so, we actually already have 6 customers signed up. So good news on that front. And that concludes my report. Questions I may be able to answer? Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Batchelor. Let's see, why don't we move forward then with, as I mentioned, our first item of business is an action item, resolution authorizing the use of teleconferencing for Utilities Advisory Commission meetings during COVID-19 state of emergency. And my thinking is if Director Batchelor or any other staff, if you're going to introduce the topic, and then maybe we'll get public comment after that. And then we'll see if the commissioners have any additional discussion before we vote.
All right, thank you, Chair Purcell. So we're asking the commission now, typically the commission does not approve resolutions, but this is one that has to do with teleconferencing of meetings. So with the state and county having the emergency order still in place, we were asked that all commissions, not just the UAC, but all commissions throughout, go ahead and approve this resolution. And by doing that, you are saying that we're moving forward to still being in a hybrid or in a Zoom participation of doing meetings virtual. As I mentioned before, Council had their very first hybrid in-person and virtual council meeting this past Monday. We had thought that we would wait before we would bring everybody back from the commission to the dais. And we thought that what we would do is we would just be able to do that. Well, now the rule has changed because of what's in place from an emergency standpoint. And this resolution is asking that if you vote yes on this and it's done by a majority, then we continue to have Zoom calls for our December and January meeting. And then if the commission decides that no, they do not want to take up this resolution tonight, then we will suspend, we'll have to suspend the December and January meetings because Council had stated in their meetings that commissions would not meet until after they were able to, after the first year, and that they were going to mandate that portion of it. So we won't be able to have our meeting if the council, or I'm sorry, the commission tonight decides not to take on this resolution. So anything to add, Sharon, for some?
No, a question. I'm confused about what is the intention for the January meeting.
Well,
I thought that by January, council's intention was that we would be back at City Hall. Is that not the
So
case?
I thought the council, and maybe Councilmember Phil Self can help me with this, but I thought that the council took it upon themselves that not to have commissions come back till after January, or was it January 1?
Boy, you know, my recollection of this was that council thought that council ought to be the guinea pig for, or the beta test for coming back to in-person or hybrid meetings. And we shouldn't mandate that boards and commissions abandon Zoom right away. And so the connection to that, to the January date is, I'm not making a link in my mind to that, but I may have missed something. The council, by the way, the council's intent is to continue with sort of hybrid meetings and in-person optional, as long as mask mandates are in place, which they still are. Right? So the council won't, intent is not to drop the Zoom thing until, to formally drop the Zoom thing until the mask mandates come off. So, I guess off the top of my head, I would say look to the UAC to decide what you folks want to do.
Thank you. So I know for a fact, like we talked about, we would not be able to, I mean, I guess as Councilmember Philsop just mentioned that we could still do Zooms. I'm not really sure that at this point why we have the resolution in front of us at that point if we're continuing to do business as usual, if we're able to hold it. I thought that it was councilors thought that we were going to have to do, we would have to do a hybrid approach, but maybe I was wrong on that.
Commissioner Johnston.
So I'm certainly in favor of doing whatever we need to do on this resolution so that we can continue to hold our meetings. But I had I guess this is a more technical question. Do we have the capability of a hybrid approach so that, you know, it at some point, if we were to go back to in-person UAC meetings, would the public continue to be able to participate by Zoom? Would commissioners who were uncomfortable participating in person be able to participate by Zoom? Do we just have that technical capability?
I think so. So the council did its first hybrid meeting on Monday night, and there were 4 people in chambers and 3 people remote. And public comment was a mix of some people actually in chambers and other people Zooming in. So it worked. It was, you know, we're sort of working out the kinks and processes and who gets called on when and how voting is done and stuff like that. There's a bunch of that kind of stuff, but I think it's technically possible.
Okay, great.
So let's see, I just want to make sure we don't miss the opportunity for public comment. So why don't we do that now, and then the commission can continue to discuss.
Okay, if anyone from the public would like to speak about this item, please raise your hand. Okay, I see one hand raised, Mr. Cole.
Mr. Cole, go ahead. As you know, we usually allow about 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Commission. I've found the Zoom meetings to be very convenient because of the early start of your meeting at 5 o'clock. It is often difficult to get to another location at that time. So I would certainly put my vote in for continuation of the Zoom possibility, hybrid or otherwise. Certainly don't want to miss the next couple of meetings. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks for your input. Are there any other members of the public?
I don't see any hands raised.
So then I guess the only part that confuses me about the resolution is the piece where if we don't adopt it, then we don't meet in December and we don't meet in January. Is there anybody who can explain how that, why there's that dependency?
I guess after listening to Councilmember Philstep, I thought I had heard through the council that they did not want want the commissions to meet on a hybrid approach until they were able to actually go
Got it.
through this process.
So the intent is that we be fully Zoom
Right, we'll be
for our
fully
next
Zoom
meeting in
next week.
December,
Right,
and that
And
is
they-
why this resolution.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I think this is only for December only, the teleconference. I don't think it
that
addresses
would make
Jan-
sense to me just because the language about 30 days.
30 days.
Okay, and so then this resolution lets us be fully Zoom for December. And then assuming things have been going well with council and the kinks are worked out and there have been no major changes to the public health situation, we would be expected to be hybrid by our January meeting.
Yes.
That makes sense to me, is
Yes.
how I read it.
That sounds correct.
Okay. Are there any other commissioners with input, thoughts?
I just want to know Commissioner Scharf has attended the meeting, has joined the meeting.
Yes. Welcome, Commissioner Scharf. All right, well then maybe, let's see. Do we have the resolution available to put on the screen? It's lengthy. But ultimately, we're looking for a motion and we just want to make sure we all know what we are voting on.
Let me share my screen. Are you able to see this? the
Yeah,
motion?
thank you. All right. So do we have a motion regarding the resolution as it appears on the screen? And we should all have received a copy of it as well. The resolution making findings to allow teleconference meetings under California Government Code Section 54953E.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair Siegel,
Approve.
Commissioner Metz,
Approve.
Commissioner Johnston,
Approved.
Commissioner Smith,
Approved?
Commissioner Scharf,
Approve.
and I approve as well. So it is approved unanimously by those commissioners in attendance. Thank you very much. Oh, and I think it's worth mentioning, or asking when come January, when we expect to move to a hybrid model, the meeting start time would move to 6 o'clock,
That's
right?
correct.
Per our previous plan. So that's worth mentioning just because the start times came up. So they would still be Zoomable by the public, but they wouldn't be starting until 6 p.m.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Let's move on then. We have an item on accepting a presentation on current and pending state legislation and approve the continued use of the 2021 legislative guidelines to 2022. It's an action item. And is there a staff presentation?
Yes, good afternoon. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Oh, and I'm so sorry. Ms. Dollar, I just realized I forgot to ask for public comment.
No problem.
So let me quickly ask if there are any members of the public wanting to address the commission on this topic.
Anyone from the public would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. No hands are raised.
All right, go ahead. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Heather Dollar, Acting Compliance Manager. This is the time of year where I get to speak with you all about our annual legislative update. And so we'll just briefly talk a little bit about some key legislation that we saw this year. I'll mention briefly some utility arrearage programs that you may have been hearing about in the news. We'll prognosticate a bit about what we might expect next year on the state side, and then I'll tee up your discussion for a possible motion and council referral. And I'll just note at the outset that I just have one slide for each of these agenda items. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask me throughout. I'll start by noting that the bills that you see on this slide certainly don't constitute all the bills that we tracked this year. Rather, they are indicative of the breadth and the scope of the type of bills that we track. And there are also some key bills important to us. Over on the right column under relevant guideline, you'll note some topic words that hyperlink, if you will, to the current legislative guidelines as a way to demonstrate how well these guidelines are working. Each bill can have an associated guideline that informs our action on the bill. So I'll just summarize each of these bills. I won't go into depth into any of them. SB 556 is a bill that we've spoken about a little bit before. It's a repeat of past year's bills. This is the telecom's attempt to implement their wireless or 5G small cell technology onto poles within the city, all city-owned poles, and utility-owned poles. This is a bill that the POU community has fought in prior years, and we did oppose this year. Importantly, the POU community was able to get utility poles amended out of the bill, so they would not have to be attached to our poles. However, luckily, the governor vetoed this bill, so it's not something that we have to worry about. Whether or not we see this again next year remains to be seen. If it is brought again this year, it'll be at least the third or fourth time that the bill has appeared, so we'll be ready for it. SB 378 is a bill that was signed into law, as were all of these other bills. This would require local governments to allow microtrenching for the installation of underground fiber. Microtrenching is certainly not a preferred method for Palo Alto, and we did work very closely with CMUA to try to discourage the author in this particular bill. However, the entire reason for the bill was to mandate that local governments allow microtrenching. So while we weren't able to stall the bill, the POU community was successful in amending in some language that stated that if there is a finding that microtrenching will specifically affect the public health or safety, that we don't have to allow it. And importantly, the bill still allows POUs to charge fees, to inspect, and to enter into agreements with the fiber providers. AB 758 is a great bill. It allows electric POUs to utilize rate reduction bonds the same way that electric IOUs can. And this is a bill that we specifically supported by writing in letters because, as you may know, rate reduction bonds offer lower interest rate than traditional bonds. So as such, they could provide savings for us on our various projects. AB 242 is a cleanup bill that just helpfully aligns the power source disclosure deadline with the deadline for data verification. So that's a bill helpful to us internally on our reporting. 323 seeks to establish certainty in the water rate setting process by establishing a statute of limitations on any judicial challenges to water or sewer rate increases. 427 allows water agencies to adopt an ordinance to enhance penalties for water theft. And then lastly, SCR 49, with the SCR standing for Senate Concurrent Resolution, formally puts in place what has been informal, which is that the first full week of October is Public Power Week. So that's just an indication of all the types of different bills that we track that affect our operations, that affect perhaps some marketing strategies internally and externally. Certainly there was some other bills mentioned in of your prior reports. Commissioner Metz?
Yes, I had a question on this. It may be coincidental in the bills that you're tracking now, but does our scope of legislative tracking include big, not utility specific bills, such as SB 9, things like that, that could result in big increases in housing, which would, have big, I would assume would have big impact on the electrical distribution system, wastewater and everything. Are we, monitoring those sorts of, not utility specific like these bills are?
The city retains a state lobbyist who works through the city manager's office. And the city manager's office has an intergovernmental affairs program, and they also have a specific intergovernmental affairs website that speaks about the bills that they have engaged in, Commissioner. So over in the city manager's office, they are indeed monitoring those big bills. We in utilities might monitor bills like that if there is kind of an obvious and direct implication onto our utility operations.
Okay. So what would that mean for something like SB 9? Does the utility just wait and see if there's an impact from that, or, it just seems like that could have a huge, I'm just trying to understand in practical terms, what you said mean that we would be doing?
Sure. Every year, the legislature introduces about 2,500 bills. And I don't have the bandwidth to read them all. And so we rely very heavily on our CMUA and NCPA. And we do analyze a lot and we read a lot. And so we start, and we have to, just because of our resources constraint, look at the bills that we know are going to really significantly impact us, such as the ones that we mentioned. If a bill, such as a housing bill, were to include specific utility impacts, we would be aware of them. And in fact, I can specifically mention, I believe it was SB 50 a few years ago, that mentioned limiting connection fees. And often there are housing bills that speak to impact fees and connection fees. And so to the extent they speak to utility connection fees, then we would certainly be engaged through CMUA on those bills. However, if they don't mention connection fees, they don't mention utilities, they don't seem to have a direct impact, then we leave it up to the city manager's office to track.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, can move on to speaking a little bit about arrearage programs. As you may have heard or know, the federal and state government are really desirous about helping people that have been significantly impacted by the pandemic. So in addition to sending out stimulus checks, they've also combined funds to help with rental payments as well as utility arrearage payments. And so specifically, the state is currently implementing two programs that I'm just going to mention briefly, partly because this is very much like the plane that is being built while it's flying. These programs are being designed almost as the same time that they're being implemented. These programs are specifically to help residents and businesses on both the natural gas, electricity, water, and wastewater side. More specifically, they will help credit any debt accrued between March 4th of last year and June 15th of this year. The program on the electric and natural gas side is the CAP program, and on the water wastewater side, it's called the QUAP program, just government acronyms. We, through our customer support services staff, have been really engaged with CMUA, who has brought forth a working group and is working directly with the agencies that are developing these programs. We have completed a survey which indicates to the state the amount of our arrearages. Based on that survey and the application that is going to be coming from utilities in the next couple of weeks will receive an allocation amount. The money that is allocated to each utility will go directly to the utilities, and then we credit residents first, and if there's money left over, businesses, and then inform them that their debt has been paid in part or in full. We expect the money to start rolling out by the end of this year, so customers will start getting their bill credits very soon. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention this pending your questions is that, again, the guidelines have worked very well to support the collaborative involvement with customer support services side within CPAU, working with CMUA. Any questions on the programs? Okay. So what can we expect in the legislative session next year? Next year is the second part of a 2-year legislative session, meaning that any of the bills that didn't pass last year will flow over into next year. And the issue areas you see here bulleted express what we think are going to be some of the issues that we're going to be paying attention to next year, partly because they represent some topics of failed legislation, and partly because they have been conversations happening. They have been the topic of conversations happening in the state building. For example, the Assembly held a hearing on building decarbonization. The Senate held a hearing regarding summer readiness, and there was an executive order regarding electric grid reliability. So we do think that those topics and others may appear next year. One bill to mention specifically was introduced by the gentleman pictured here, Mr. Becker, our state senator. He introduced SB 67 in January of this year. This would have established what he called the 24/7 Clean Energy Standard Program, with a goal of 100% of electric load being supplied by eligible clean energy resources by 2045. And if you recall, 2045 is the date by which the state aspires to have 100% clean energy being delivered to residents and businesses. Mr. Becker would like to turn that aspirational goal into a concrete goal, and that was part of his bill. Reaching the bill's goal would have meant significantly increasing storage across the state, a sharp increase in our supply costs, a restructure of our supply portfolio, and a significant change in how hydro is dispatched across the state. It was a big bill. We had conversations with Mr. Becker's policy advisor to speak with him about its impacts. CMUA met with him, NCPA met with him, SCAPA, which is NCPA's counterpart, met with him. I'm sure the electric IOUs met with him. The bill was shelved very early on in the legislative session. We do know that he intends to bring it back next year, albeit in a slightly different form. He still wants to turn that aspirational 2045 goal into a concrete one. However, this time he wants to focus on what's going to happen policy-wise on the state between 2030 and 2045. As you may know, our cap and trade program ends in 2030. So what's the compliance mechanism that's going to get us to that 2045 goal? That's what he wants to focus on in his next iteration of SB 67. We haven't seen what that's going to look like yet. It's not been drafted. There is no new language. We just know that this is an idea that he has for his next version of the bill. And then lastly, you'll see written on the screen here that there is a new Senate subcommittee on clean energy, and Mr. Becker is the chair, which makes sense because the goal of the subcommittee is to work to achieve a 100% clean electrical grid. So we expect a lot from Mr. Becker next year, both personally with his own legislation and with the subcommittee, and we'll certainly be following all the goings-ons. Any questions about that? Okay. Because the last item is just for your potential discussion and motion to refer to council The idea that we would take the current guidelines and without changing them, have them apply to 2022. As mentioned throughout the presentation, the guidelines have worked very well. They've allowed us to collaborate, to engage, and to be flexible and nimble where we need to. So we're just asking that you refer the item to council so that they can adopt the 2021 guidelines through 2022.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Commissioners, any questions, comments, discussion? Commissioner Metz.
Yes, I had one question, and thank you for the presentation, because some of those I didn't understand, so I appreciate that. On number 10, there's a list of criteria on page 3. And I had a question which is related to question number 10, or item number 10, criteria number 10, which says support government action that cost effectively reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And the question is, can you please clarify, what does cost effective mean in this context? In other words, for example, does it include the cost of externalities caused by greenhouse gases that the city faces or that the planet faces? And is the converse of this also true? In other words, would we oppose other government action that we don't view as cost effective that reduces greenhouse gases? So I think particularly I'd like to understand what we mean by cost effective here.
So the latter part of your question, would we oppose government action that isn't cost effective? Possibly. The first part of your question, what does cost effective mean? That depends certainly on what the policy objective is. But as you know, as always, we want to be sure that we are delivering reliable services at a cost-effective approach for our customers. So for example, if there were a bill like SB 67 that I mentioned that would have increased costs by 20% or more, we would not view that as a cost-effective mechanism and would certainly have to have conversations with the author's office. So it is a bit subjective based on what staff feels is cost-effective in providing our services, but essentially at the core of it, we just want to protect our customers and make sure that they aren't paying exorbitant fees for a state policy.
Right. I think I understand that, but I don't understand how it gets implemented. In other words, the Palo Alto Utilities has real direct costs associated with greenhouse gases, right? We buy RECs, we buy offsets. We have to pay fees to are related to electricity and so on. So we have direct costs, and then the ratepayers in Palo Alto have costs associated with climate change. They're buying more, having to spend more on air conditioning and so on. So there are direct and indirect costs associated with that. I'm trying to understand to what degree we consider those costs when we talk about cost. I just don't know what cost effective means, whether those things are in or out.
Well, again, it would kind of depend on the specific bill or policy item, but since when we talk about government action here, we're talking about a state policy. And so it's not going to drill down to the level that you're talking about. But whenever we analyze the state policy, we do consider, is this going to increase costs in the way that you're speaking? And so while I can't quantify what cost effective might mean, because we're talking about this in the abstract, this general proposition of number 10 allows us to engage whenever we are faced with a state policy that is going to mandate or ask us to reduce GHG emissions in a way that appears like it's going to cost our customers an exorbitant amount of money. All of these guidelines are simply mechanisms by which we feel comfortable engaging in policy. We wouldn't be telling anyone what you as commissioners think that we should do. It simply allows us a mechanism to say, this is a policy that speaks to, in this example, GHG rejection, which we want. and it speaks to increasing costs. And we know that the UAC would like us to make sure that we are decreasing those emissions in a cost-effective manner as possible. I don't know if that's helpful to you, Commissioner, but it's very high level.
Right. I guess not. You know, as an example, I mean, you know, the state, the ISO has been, you know, buying, increasing gas generation for peaking and so on. And, you know, presumably that increases the mix of the greenhouse gases in the electricity mix that we buy. So therefore we have to go out and buy more RECs, say, to compensate for that. So it just seems like those factors need to be part of the decision of what's cost effective, because those RECs are a real direct cash cost, right?
Certainly, and we don't prescribe the specific factors that we use in determining what is cost effective. We look at it more of a holistic approach. So if there is a specific piece of legislation that's going to mandate that we do something, we're going to look at all those cost drivers that are implicit in that piece of legislation. But since we don't have a particular bill in front of us, it's a little more difficult to have the conversation.
Okay, fair. Yeah, fair enough. I understand. Okay. Okay, thank you for
Of
listening.
course, yes.
Commissioner Scharf.
Thanks. So I want to say that I think that these are good. I think they've worked well in the past. And I think I just wanted to reflect in response to Commissioner Metz's comments. My time on the council and then on the UAC, I've actually found staff to be really good at taking broad direction. And that's what these really are. These are broad direction. I can't think of an instance where staff has taken a direction by opposing a bill or supporting a bill which wasn't within council's guidelines, where council was like, you shouldn't have done that. I really don't remember that in 10 years now or whatever. So I think I at least have a lot of trust in staff in their ability to parse this and their ability to make the right choices on the bills. And where they don't, they do check in. I know they check in on stuff where it's a close call or whatever. And they need the ability to act quickly. I think we can't underestimate that. They can't always, you know, check in and bring stuff on a particular bill to council. It's not efficient, or to bring it to us. And so I think the discretion that's in this with these broad outlines works really well. And I do want to say that I've worked with Heather now for a while, and I'm actually really impressed with your ability to parse this, Heather, and your whole ability to work with our state legislators on these issues. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Do you want a motion, by the way, to approve, or are we still talking about it?
If you so desire, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve these.
I actually had some questions myself. I was just waiting to see if there were any other commissioners with their hands up, which it doesn't look like there are, but if it's okay, or I guess you can make the motion and then we still discuss some more.
Yeah, we can discuss after the motion. Who knows? I may not get a second.
What every year when we do this, I have the same sort of reaction, which is that it feels like this is a good set of guidelines. It feels like they're working. The one place where I would just, I guess, like some clarification is, you know, the very first guideline is about local control and sort of opposing anything that removes local control. And at the same time, we often have conversations here at the UAC around city policies where we're like, you know, this really should be done at the state level. You know, for example, like our whole discussion of the natural gas utility, and like one city going it alone is kind of a big deal. And like, wow, it'd be great if California took this on. And you know, and so acknowledging I'm about to ask you a hypothetical question. It's like, if there was legislation at the state level that was looking at, you know, putting a lot of restrictions on natural gas service, which is something we're exploring ourselves, but which then would be removing local control, would we oppose that under the retain local control part of the guidelines? Or would we say, hey, we're trying to do this. It would actually be great if the whole state was trying to do this. We're in and not oppose it. Does that question make sense?
I think so. And with the understanding that it's a hypothetical, I'll respond in the same vein. And first note that just because we are allowed through these guidelines to oppose something or to support something doesn't mean that we always do. There's a fair amount of discretion that comes into play where we consider the political landscape, the legislative landscape, the specific bill, and many other items. So I just want to kind of set the table there and saying in a hypothetical bill like that, it could be possible based on the language of the bill that we stay off, that we stay neutral, and that we don't engage. More specifically, in the hypothetical bill, we would look at the language and we would use that opportunity perhaps to say, we think the state should take it on. Certainly we could do that without opposing or supporting, but instead engaging the author in a broader discussion. To the extent that that discussion isn't meaningful or the author doesn't want to do that, and to the extent that this bill constricted our ability to make our own decisions for our own utility in our own community, then it's quite possible that we would oppose the bill on that basis.
So going back to your example from Josh Becker's bill, hold on, I wrote down the number of it, SB 67. Your brief description of it made it sound like a lot of things that we want to do here in Palo Alto, at the state level. And yet, per your description, Palo Alto definitely came out on the side of opposing it and engaging with him to explain here's why we oppose it. Is that because the city of Palo Alto felt that there is a cost-effective way to get there by 2045? And he just hadn't identified the right way to get there?
Well, I would first say that we did not oppose the bill.
Oh, I see.
We did not take any position on the bill.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Oh, sure. And that's part of that discretion that I mentioned comes into play. We always would engage with an author, particularly this is our senator. So we're definitely going to engage with the office first to get clarification, to ensure they understand our position, to see if they would take amendments. There's kind of a long road that we generally go before coming out opposed to a bill. And even when we do, Palo Alto, I don't think has ever ourselves opposed a piece of legislation. Rather, we work through our trade associations to oppose the bill. And with regard to Senator Becker's bill, we did express to him that we are on board with his policy objectives and that we are desirous of helping him to move toward that clean energy future. But the mandates and the deadlines and the compliance dates he contained in that bill, we just couldn't achieve. I mean, it just literally could not be done. And if we wanted to, it would mean like at least a 25% rate increase for all of our consumers. So we just said, can we talk about this? Can we wait? And so he agreed with us and others, and that's one of the reasons why the bill stalled.
Sorry, did you say it was not doable, or it was only doable with a 25% rate increase?
Don't quote me on the 25% because the bill died so early in the legislative session, it did not even receive its very first analysis.
Gotcha. Okay.
By the legislation. So I do know a significant increase, and it would not have been achievable even with that increase within the compliance dates, because the state would have had to build storage facilities, site storage facilities, get through CEQA storage facilities, change the way the hydro is dispatched. As you know, this all takes time, and we just didn't think it was doable within the prescribed timelines in the bill.
I see. Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
Any other commissioners? All right, does anybody want a second? Commissioner Sharp's motion?
I'll second.
All right, then I will do a vote. Actually, can we get the on the screen, just a reminder of what we're,
Possibly.
what
If
we're
I,
voting on?
if I can find it again, absolutely.
I think it's just attachment A, right? Is that where
I-
we're voting to improve the legislative policy guidelines in their entirety, or is it? Actually, I think it's that we recommend that the city council accept a presentation.
Um, it's still a little bit different than that.
I have a motion. Heather, you want me to share that?
Oh, I thought I was. Am I not sharing my screen?
Oh, no, you are.
Oh,
I have
okay.
something. Tabitha gave me a summary
Okay.
of it.
Oh, okay.
You want-
There's a motion.
Let me try and share this. Let's see if it captures the essence.
Oh. Oh, great.
All right, so the motion is that we accept the staff presentation regarding current and pending state legislation and recommend the city council approve the continued use of the 2021 utilities legislative policy guidelines through 2022. I like how you've already typed in our votes, but let me actually call them. Vice Chair Siegel,
Approve.
Commissioner Metz,
Approved.
Commissioner Johnston,
Approve.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Scharf.
Yes.
All right, and I approve as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, it is 6 o'clock. We have one more item. We often take a little break about at the halfway point, which is I think where we are now. But since we've only got one item left, how about we keep it pretty short? By my clock, it's 6:02. How about we come back at 6:10 and keep going? All right, sounds good. See everybody back at 6:10.
Glad you're back on time.
All right, let's see. All right, why don't we jump back in? Our last item of new business tonight is a discussion and presentation on the impact of decarbonization on the resiliency of single-family homes in Palo Alto. And before we launch into the presentation, let's see if there are any members of the public that want to speak. Let's see, looks like Mr. Cole.
Oh, sorry, I stepped away. My bad. If anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand. Yes, Mr. Cole, let me allow you to speak. All right, Mr. Cole, the floor is yours.
Go ahead.
Hi, Commissioners. Very interesting report. I'm so glad that you were pursuing this and Stanford to work on this. In my own home where I had tested this out, I was finding that I could get by on about 3 kilowatt hours a day, not including space heating. And this did include a little bit of cooking. Water heating was supplied by solar hot water, so the coefficient of efficiency was more like 15 instead of 3.5 as it would be with a heat pump water heater. I guess what I'm getting at is that what you need to get by in an emergency is probably a lot less than what is stated in the report, say for an earthquake, a long period of time outage. We don't really need to charge the EV. Even CERT was saying that that's our emergency response teams, that bicycles are going to be far more reliable ways to get around town in terms of an earthquake. So I'm glad the report did mention that. So I just didn't want to put the expectation out there that everybody needed a 15 kilowatt system with a 13 kW battery pack to survive. You can get by on a lot less. No one's going to freeze to death in Palo Alto over a week's time. It may not be as comfortable. But if you're doing just your basics, I think you can get by on a lot less. So other than that, I found the report very interesting. I'm glad you guys pursued this. I think it's important to set correct expectations as we go into electrification and decarbonization. So this report helps to do that. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Would anyone else from the public like to speak on this item? I do not see any more hands.
Okay. All right, then why don't we go ahead? I assume there's a staff presentation on this.
There is, Chair Patel. So I'd like to introduce Lena Perkins, our senior resource. Yeah, that will be going over this decarbonization report. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Director Batchelor. And thank you, commissioners and council member Phil Seth. I'm really just here to introduce our fellow from Stanford, Shoja Jahangard. And it's my pleasure to introduce him from our Stanford Summer Fellow program. He worked primarily with Shiva Swaminathan, Jonathan Abenstein, the Office of Emergency Services, as well as a couple of our building and decarbonization experts, Christine Tam and Scott Melberg. And this report, it really represents the first steps towards understanding some of the impacts and opportunities for resiliency of all electric single family homes in Palo Alto. So with that, Shoja, you can take it away.
Thank you, Lena. I'm going to share my screen right now. Is the presentation showing for everyone?
Not yet.
Not yet. There it is.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, my name is Shoja Jahangard and I'm a master's student in civil and environmental engineering at Stanford. This past summer, I had the privilege to be a Schultz Energy Fellow with the City of Palo Alto Utilities, where I've been researching the impact of electrification and decarbonization on the resiliency of single-family homes in Palo Alto. Today, I plan to share the results of my research and facilitate discussion about the topic. So First, I'm going to quickly start off with the background, project objective, and framework for study. Then I'll begin discussing some of the results from my research, which include investigating various disaster scenarios, comparing energy services between mixed energy and all-electric homes, and discussing various resiliency measures for utilities and homeowners. And lastly, I will delve into the key takeaways from the study and dive into any input or questions the commissioners may have. So I'm sure most of you are already familiar with Palo Alto's Sustainability and Climate Action Plan of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below 1990 levels by 2030. Achieving these goals will require increases in building energy efficiency and design, reducing natural gas use in homes via electrification and appliances, and electrifying the vehicle fleet. This analysis will mainly focus on reducing natural gas use in buildings through electrification. Electrification entails replacing natural gas appliances with electric appliances and can include replacing internal combustion engine vehicles with electric vehicles as well. So the project objective of this research is to assess the resiliency consequences of fully electrifying single-family homes in Palo Alto and any additional vulnerabilities caused from switching from multiple fuel sources to a single source. My framework for analysis took the following path. First, we assessed resiliency of electricity, natural gas, and gasoline systems in Palo Alto. Then we chose and evaluated 3 major disaster scenarios or outage scenarios. Then we assessed existing mixed fuel home resiliency in those outage scenarios. And we also assessed the resiliency of electric homes in those scenarios. And lastly, we investigated options for all electric homes to increase their resiliency. So this slide shows the resiliency differences between the electricity, natural gas, and gasoline infrastructure in Palo Alto. Starting off with the electrical grid, the electricity grid has above ground wires, which are vulnerable to weather, tree branches, and animals, but can have relatively quick repair times. It also has underground electric lines, which are less susceptible to damage, but when damaged, do take longer to repair. Currently, Palo Alto is only fed by a single corridor of electricity transmission lines. On the natural gas side, the natural gas system has transmission pumps largely powered by natural gas and are less susceptible to normal weather events than the electricity system. However, after disruptions, it may require pilot relights, which can take a significant time, and after major disaster events can take much longer to repair than above ground electrical lines. And lastly, for the gasoline system requires electricity to operate. Gas stations use electric pumps to pull gasoline out of underground storage tanks. Furthermore, most gas stations in California do not have backup generators for pumping gasoline during outages. So now that we have discussed a few of the energy infrastructure's vulnerabilities, let's discuss possible disaster scenarios that can lead to power outages or disruptions to the gas system and the time frame and area that can be affected. For this report, we considered 3 types of scenarios. For scenario 1, we considered a major earthquake scenario similar to the USGS Hayward earthquake study. In this scenario, there is widespread damage to the electricity system, about 80%, but about 70% is repaired within 72 hours. There is also limited damage to the natural gas system, about 5%, but it took about 9 to 11 days to restore 50% of those natural gas disconnections. Furthermore, the natural gas distribution system will need to be leak checked and pilot lights relit. And gas stations need power to operate, so many gas stations may not be able to pump gasoline for the first few days. For scenario 2, we considered a Palo Alto only power outage, possibly due to a transmission line failure, similar to the 2010 plane crash incident. In this scenario, only Palo Alto will be without electricity, and electricity can be fully restored relatively quickly in about 1 to 3 days. The natural gas systems inside and outside of Palo Alto will be unaffected, but the gasoline systems in Palo Alto, which require electricity to run, will not be able to operate. Therefore, citizens will have to refuel their cars outside of Palo Alto during that time period. Lastly, for scenario 3, we considered a cyber attack that cripples the electric grid in the Western US. In this scenario, the electric grid could take weeks to fully restore, and natural gas systems will be impacted to some extent, but the electricity and gasoline systems will be severely impacted. Next, we assessed the current resiliency of mixed fuel homes versus all electric single family homes. From an appliance assessment, we found that the main appliances in a single family home that required natural gas to run were space heaters, water heaters, stoves, ovens, clothes dryers, and pool heaters. We found that of natural gas appliances, only stoves and gas tank water heaters will work when electricity is out. Natural gas furnaces, radiant floor heating, instant water heaters, ovens, clothes dryers, and pool heaters all require electricity to operate. However, without electricity, stoves would require ignition by hand, and cooking with stoves without mechanical ventilation is not healthy. Furthermore, electric water heaters with tanks, either heat pumps or standard, can provide 1 to 2 days of hot water, even when power is out. And as an example, for a 24-hour electric-only outage affecting only Palo Alto, there would be differences in service between a mixed fuel and all-electric single-family home. All-electric stoves will not function, whereas gas stoves can. An all-electric home will have 50 to 100% of hot water needs met, whereas a natural gas water heater with tank will meet water needs 100% of the time. So on this slide, we take the 3 disaster scenarios previously discussed and show the effects of those disasters on various end uses in the home over 4 types of homes. So those 4 types of homes include A, mixed fuel single family home, B, an all electric single family home, C, an all electric single family home with solar storage and electric vehicles, and D, an all electric single family home with a natural gas generator. So we can see those 4 home types in the column on the left with the different energy services such as heating, cooling, cooking, etc., and the type of fuel for those services across the various home energy use. So at the top of the slide in the middle, we can see the 3 outage scenarios which could affect Palo Alto residents that were mentioned earlier. And then on the right side, we can see the impact levels which will be used to categorize the severity that these various outage scenarios can have across the multiple home energy cases. So the impact levels vary from none in green to extremely high in purple, where none denotes no impact to the service and extremely high denotes a severe or possibly life-threatening impact. The impact levels were created by considering 3 factors, which include a service's importance in meeting customers' basic life needs, duration, extent, and severity of disruption for electricity, natural gas, or gasoline systems, and the ability of the device to buffer impact or to self-sustain for periods of time. So while we don't have enough time to go through the impacts for each disaster scenario and each type of home, I did want to briefly discuss the current mixed fuel home. So firstly, we can see that in the earthquake scenario for a mixed fuel home, it will have extremely high impacts for heating and cooling with high impacts for cooking and low impacts for transportation and hot water. In the Palo Alto localized power outage, heating and cooling have extremely high impacts while cooking only has a low impact, and transportation and hot water heating have none. Lastly, in the cyber attack scenario, a current mixed home has extremely high impacts for heating and cooling, moderate impacts for cooking, and low impacts for transportation and hot water. Now showing the all-electric home, we can see similar impact levels between a mixed energy home and a fully electric home. Both types of homes have similar impacts during an earthquake scenario and during a Palo Alto specific outage scenario. Only cooking is worse off in a fully electric home across the 2. However, the cyber attack scenario poses higher impacts across transportation, cooking, and water heating for the all-electric scenario. Now showing the home scenarios for electric homes with solar and storage or natural gas generators, we can see a few trends. Firstly, all-electric homes with solar and storage have the least impacts across all 3 disaster scenarios. Secondly, we can see that the Palo Alto specific power outage, that column in the middle, has the least impact due to its relatively short duration and localized effect when compared to the other 2 longer and widespread scenarios. So this table shows an average of the impact results across all 3 outage scenarios for a current mixed fuel home and a current all-electric home. So we can see that overall, there's little difference in service impact between mixed fuel single-family homes and fully electric homes. There's extremely high impact to heating and cooling, moderate to high impact to cooking, and low impact to transportation and water heating. The only difference there is between cooking. So even with 2 of 3 disasters, primarily in the electric system, there are very similar energy service impacts to the mixed fuel and all-electric homes. This is largely due to most natural gas appliances and all gasoline stations requiring electricity to function. So now we can see the average impact from electric homes with solar storage and electric homes with natural gas generators. Electric homes with storage and with natural gas generators only have impact levels in the none to low categories across all services, since they have the ability to generate their own electricity during an outage. So now that we have discussed the resiliency differences between mixed fuel homes and fully electrified homes, we will quickly discuss a few of the options homeowners can take to increase their resiliency. A few of those include rooftop solar and storage wired to operate during grid outages, mobile power stations, propane, gasoline, and natural gas backup generators, uninterruptible power supplies for medical equipment, vehicle to home charging, smart control panels, which allow energy shifting during outages. And there's also other resiliency measures like increasing building insulation and higher efficiency appliances, using propane or charcoal grills for cooking, air drying clothes, biking and using electric bikes as lower energy alternatives, and having an emergency kit on hand. Furthermore, the City of Palo Alto Utilities has several initiatives underway to improve resiliency as well. Those include adding a second set of electric transmission lines into the city, undergrounding lines to the Palo Alto foothills, undergrounding an additional 2021 contract to catch up on electric distribution maintenance, and undergrounding overhead electric distribution lines. Lastly, there's also replacing PVC gas pipes with the more flexible and resilient polyethylene pipes. So what were the key takeaways from this report? Of the natural gas appliances, only stoves and gas tank water heaters work when the power is out. Natural gas furnaces, radiant floor heating, instant water heaters, ovens, clothes dryers, and pool heaters all require electricity to operate. Stoves would require ignition by hand, and operating without ventilation is not healthy. Electric water heaters with tanks, either heat pumps or standard, can provide 1 to 2 days of hot water. And in earthquakes, electric systems tend to experience more widespread disruption, but tend to recover faster than natural gas. Number 2, all electric home resiliency could be enhanced with a wide array of products. These include simple and low-cost solutions, such as small battery packs, propane, gasoline, electric generators, outdoor propane ranges, or electric vehicle to home charging. And they can also include higher cost solutions, such as solar and storage or whole house natural gas generators. 2 more key takeaways are that the resiliency of electric vehicles is equal to or better than gasoline cars in major disaster scenarios. The range of electric vehicles are currently similar to gasoline cars, and gas stations cannot function in the event of electrical outages if they do not have backup generators. Furthermore, electric vehicles at home can be charged with a solar PV system. And finally, for number 4, a 7.6 kilowatt solar PV system and a 13.5 kilowatt hour battery is enough to generally meet most of the energy needs of all electric homes during a 24-hour power outage from March through October. A larger solar PV system and or better insulated home will be needed to meet the majority of the needs for the winter months. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Commissioners. Commissioner Smith.
First of all, thank you. Excellent report. And I too am thrilled that the city of Palo Alto actually initiated this. So thank you so much for your efforts and your support. This is fantastic. On your key takeaways, I do have a question on your assumption. The 7.6 kilowatt solar PV system and the 13.5 kilowatt battery, how did we arrive at that assumption?
Yeah, so this was done through 2 different steps. Sorry. This was done through 2 separate steps. The first one was looking at an appliance assessment from all of California, which was looking at what were average energy uses across California. And then I compared that with Palo Alto specific energy uses. Originally, I had a smaller solar array because that was the average back when I did this, not when I did the study, but at the time frame that I was looking at. But it was updated with this larger solar system because that's the size that can be possible for many Palo Alto homes.
Yeah.
So
Oh, and can I just interject? That was exactly right, Shoja. And then, based upon the RMI study, looking at Rocky Mountain Institute study, looking at Oakland, California, the most economical size of a solar array for an all-electric home in Oakland, which is pretty comparable to Palo Alto, in the nation in terms of weather, was 7 kilowatts. And that was based on, again, an economical optimization would provide about 90% of the annual home's needs. And given that the assumed, the reference residences for single family homes in this report were drawing about 10% more energy on an annual basis for all electric homes than the Oakland system, we upsized that by 10% and modeled that. So there's certainly more, it's pretty easy to fit more solar panels than this if you have an unshaded roof. But again, this was, likely to be closest to economical for Palo Altans with an all electric home.
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnston?
So yes, thank you for the short report. I really found it interesting, and I found it quite encouraging for people who are nervous about going to an all-electric home. I think this provides some comfort that you're certainly no worse off in an emergency with an all-electric home, or little worse off, and better off if you have a solar with storage. And I think that's an important point. And I hope that as we try to encourage people to electrify, we'll find a way to get this information out to people so that they will be comforted. But I did have one question about the solar with storage. And I know we've talked about this before, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on it. It's not enough, as I understand it, to simply have a solar panels, even 7.6 kilowatt solar system on your roof, if you don't also have the storage, because you can't kind of throw a switch and divert the solar power into your home electrical system. You have to go through the storage. Have I got that right?
So yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's almost partially right. So there is something called let me see if let's change. Yeah, so there is something called, I don't think it was included on here. But there is a solar inverter system, which are a lot cheaper than solar storage. And those can allow exactly what you're saying, where rooftop solar goes directly to appliances, but it usually can only go up to 2 kilowatts of electricity. So it can't cover all of the home's energy needs, but during an emergency, it can act instead of having solar. If you have instead of having storage, you can have a solar inverter system, which allows solar energy to go directly to your house.
Okay, so I saw that in the report, and I also saw something somewhere else in the report that you can have a system in your house which will allow you to direct where, which devices would get the electricity. So I take it that if you just had the inverter and you had this, I forget what you call it, the system that will kind of direct the energy to certain devices, you could kind of get by, although it wouldn't be as good as having the storage.
Exactly. Yeah.
So just, I don't want to take a lot of time, but briefly, why can't you simply take the power from the solar panels on the roof and throw a switch and power your house? What's the technical problem with doing that?
I'm actually not sure on that. But I think normally when you have solar coming into the home, it goes to the grid, not directly to the home unless you have battery storage. So I'm not sure on the technical side, but normally it doesn't go directly to the home. You need to have that.
I think it was an unfair question to you, but I'm hoping that
Yeah.
someone else can.
Yeah. And so, you have to have, so Shoja's right, with the typical solar array, it is wired, not to go to your house, to go to the grid. And if it doesn't see power on the grid, you will not generate any power. If you have it specifically wired through a special inverter and wired basically to a transfer switch to your home, and Shiva, feel free to jump in here and correct me, then it can function as a backup generator. And I'm hearing from Shoja that 2 kilowatts is generally the limit. And again, maybe Lisa Benatar wants to jump in and correct me here, but again, you do need to have the system specifically wired to go to your home in order to operate in a mode with a broad outage. That they are wired for safety reasons to not generate unless you have a specific transfer switch, and that's to protect the utility line workers. So it is a more complicated solar installation process. It's a safety thing. If a solar panel, the inverter doesn't see power from the grid, it's not going to generate. And so if you want it to generate in an outage to power your home, you need it to be wired into a different type of inverter, and you need it to, and I believe you need a transfer switch, and you need basically more expensive and more careful permitting and connections. So Shiva, are you here? Do you want to round that out for me?
No, I think you covered it well, Lena. And again, we're talking about during the daytime. At nighttime, you don't have any energy. So the
I was going to say that too. Yeah, that's only when the sun is shining.
Right. So just to understand this, the inverter, and you mentioned that the permitting is more complicated. And I guess one of the questions is this one of the permitting areas that we should be looking at to make it simpler so that people could more easily install inverters to be able to use solar for backup generation?
So I think the application of direct inverter to load is mostly off grid, as in you have such a system, not necessarily on your roof, but on your somewhere as you go camping or something like that. But for us, currently, I'm not aware of any such systems in Palo Alto because of the solar inverters currently. The regular inverters disconnect when there is no grid power.
And I think you can wire them. I think Lisa Benatar might even have one like that. I think if you have a transfer switch in the same way that you have, a whole house natural gas backup generator, that you can get it permitted in the same way. But I think your point is well taken, Commissioner Johnston, that at the very least, we should make sure that people know that if they install their solar panels in the typical, cheapest, easiest fashion, that they are not going to power their home in the case of a grid outage. And maybe have some educational material and anything along streamlining in that regard to the extent possible, because it is a safety issue, I think is not a bad idea.
Well, I agree with that. And I would also focus on the flip side, which is I think it would be useful to educate people that about what they would need to do if they do want to make sure that their solar system can provide emergency power. Because to me, again, for somebody who's contemplating kind of cutting off gas, going all electric, their natural worry is what happens when the power goes down. And if you can provide them with a solution, even though it may not be cheap and may not be the easiest thing, if you can provide them with a solution, I think that will help people get over the fear of being all electric. So I would hope that, and you know, costs of all these things, costs of battery storage, we hope will come down. I don't know whether inverter technology is such that the costs are likely to come down, but it seems to me in our effort to get single family homes to electrify, it really is going to be helpful to make these technologies, well, first of all, to educate people on these technologies, and to the extent that we have anything to do with making them easier to install, including the permitting process, that would be something we should look at. But thank you very much for this report. I really found it interesting.
Let's see, it's a little bit unusual, but Mr. Cole has in the public has his hand up, and he does have a lot of knowledge about this area. So Mr. Cole, if you had something to add to Commissioner Johnston's question, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Lisa. I appreciate this opportunity to speak and to answer Commissioner Johnston's question most directly. First off, when the power goes out, your inverter disconnects. Whether it's battery backup or not, it disconnects from the line to keep the lineman safe that might be repairing that line. There is one inverter on the market that when the power goes out, it supplies a separate outlet with 2,000 watts of power. And again, as Shiva pointed out, this is only during the day. So this is a single manufacturer that offers this option. It's a SMA inverter. And that's a nice feature. It will get you by when the sun is out. It'll provide, as long as the sun is shining, that much electricity. All the other inverters would have to be coupled with battery backup and a transfer switch, which means they would then also have to go through the more arduous permitting and inspection. The SMA inverter, which is a string inverter, would supply you with this 2,000 watts of power. And so in my practice, when I need to replace an inverter, I do talk to the homeowner and I try to replace that inverter with this SMA inverter, hopefully to spread resiliency around the community. So I hope that answers your questions, and thanks again so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. It's all really interesting information, and I hope we can make it available to people as we encourage electrification.
Yeah, likewise, it answered one of the questions I had, which was whether, because we have a significant installed base of PV systems at this point. You know, as Director Batchelor pointed out at the beginning of our meeting, the Sun Shares program has been very successful for many years running. And so I just want to know if it was possible to add an inverter after the fact. And it sounds like that is something that you can replace if you wanted to have the smart inverter. Are there any other commissioners with questions or comments? All right, well, Vice Chair Siegel, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. Thank you for the presentation. It was very, very interesting, very informative, very hopeful. I guess the one question I had was just sort of on the economics. As I read it, the only way to be fully electric is to have the battery storage, because once you're talking about any kind of propane or gas backup, then you're not fully electric. And I'm just wondering, like, and with this large solar panel system that is being proposed, what kind of costs are we talking about, and how available is that to homeowners here?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important question that we didn't have time to thoroughly go through in this report. This was very initial, but for like ballpark numbers, this, I think if the image on the bottom right, which is one of those propane or natural gas backup generators. Those are very expensive, and those can power a whole home and are around $8,000 to $10,000. Whereas solar and storage can also be, $15,000 to $20,000, depending on if you're leasing or if you're buying. So both of those solutions are very expensive, and that's part of the issue, I think. But the costs haven't fully been looked into yet, at least on my end for this report.
Thanks. So I guess, yeah, anything that we, in addition to sort of the permitting on the front end, anything that the city can do, or, back to our lobbying conversation, that the state can do, where we can bring down the cost so that homeowners who are thinking about it, it's not a big barrier to the process, would be great. And I'd love to see more studies on that.
Yeah, and I will say, I think that is going to be in some follow-on work, looking in more detail at some costs, and financing is available for the solar systems and sometimes for the battery systems as well. And it's something that we've had some there's some interest from OES or community members about potentially, since Tesla Powerwalls are really big, perhaps they could be distributed throughout vulnerable parts of the community or things like that. Every home for typical outages doesn't really need a Powerwall. So yeah, and I'll hold my comments there.
Commissioner Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I had just a follow-up to my earlier question. Is there, and perhaps you did this, but if you could just confirm, did you look at Palo Alto's residents and determine, because I think we have this available, what is the average monthly usage of electricity of a single family home in Palo Alto?
Yes, that was part of it. We looked at specifically single family residential homes, and took that data and averaged it. Yes.
So what was the average that you end up using?
I do not have that exact number on me right now, but it is in the larger report, and I'd be happy to email you about that.
I think it was around 800 kilowatt hours a month for for the mixed energy, and more like 1,200 or so for all electric.
Okay. That was it. That helps my math. Thank you.
Do we have any data on air conditioner installations in Palo Alto? Since that's a large driver of electricity use, but anecdotally, it seems like not that big of a fraction of people have them.
I'm not sure about that. The data I was looking at, sorry, was total electricity use. Maybe Lena or Shiva might have more information on that.
Yeah, I think that most new construction is going in with air conditioning, and these are much more energy intensive homes than they'll, in some ways, and more efficient in others. And then they're, anecdotally, their air conditioning is more and more a factor, especially with the smoke in the summertime, because the smoke coincides with hot days. And so people are concerned about opening their windows to cool at night. And so you get the multi-day heat buildup that was not common in the past. And I would just say that, most of the folks we talk to, if the installing of an air conditioner is a great opportunity to put in a bi-directional air conditioner. So put in a heat pump, as a furnace replacement as well.
Fair point. Let's see. I see Mr. Cole has raised his hand again. Did you have something else to contribute? Mr. Cole?
No, I didn't have anything else to contribute. Thank
Oh,
you.
sorry. Your Zoom hand is raised, but gotcha. All right, let's see. I just have one more question myself, which is the smart control panel. What is that and how does it work? Is it something that that a homeowner can sort of purchase and it automatically starts working with all their appliances, or do they have to like build this smart home controlled by the smart control panel from the ground up and have appliances that cooperate?
Yeah, so
Go ahead, Shoja.
I was going to say, I think it works in tandem well with battery storage and things like that, where before an outage occurs, you can, work with the smart panel and allot how much energy would you like to go in certain spots, or just maybe just what would you prioritize? Would you prioritize cooling or heating or things like that during an outage? So it knows not to send energy to your TV or something like that. But I don't think it has to be a whole ground up.
How does it know what appliance is consuming the power?
Yeah, so I can take this, but Shoja did a great response. So, one smart panel that we're aware of and that Silicon Valley Clean Energy is installing about 100 as a pilot in Santa Clara County is span.io. And the way that works is it works by circuit breaker. And so any loads that you want to be able to differentiate needs to be on different circuit breakers. So it can be a sub panel to your main control panel, and then you prioritize which loads and basically like an outage scenario. It's wired to your battery, it's wired to your solar, and you say, okay, these are the loads I want you to keep running, and these are the ones I want you to drop. And it cannot currently throttle any loads, so you can't charge your EV at half. It's just you just say like, hey, if an outage happens, make sure you don't drain my battery by charging my Tesla, right? That's kind of the biggest thing, or turn off the dryer, or other things like that. So that's how it works with basically.
If it's on the circuit level, that's a fairly complete answer to my question. Okay, and then it has to be wired in at that level.
Yeah.
And you also said it's only sort of sold as part of a solar storage configuration, or is it? I guess it doesn't make sense otherwise. So
no, I mean, they have a whole pilot program with utilities who are interested in using these panels without solar or storage as a means to avoid upgrading electrical service, where it's difficult to upgrade electrical service because it can be a sub panel behind the main panel. And so that is another application, as well as an outage, as well as a utility controlled, emergency application where some emergency happens and we say, okay, your 100 amp panel, now it's a 20 amp panel, and the customer can decide what 20 amps they want, but the utility now has control over, nobody can exceed their amount. So in their early stage, but they've been selling commercially for about a year and a half.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, I'll add my appreciation to Mr. Jahangard, I hope I'm saying that correctly, for an excellent piece of research and report. If there are no other commissioners, then I think we will end that discussion and go to our next agenda item, which is commissioner comments and reports from meetings and events. Are there any commissioners with anything to report? Commissioner Scharf.
Oh, just briefly, I wanted to let people know that on NCPA, I've been asked to chair the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee for NCPA. So that should be a lot of fun this year and should be really interesting. And I'll, as much as possible, try to invite all of you to the events now that I'm chair.
Excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Metz.
Yes, I wanted to share that I've continued to investigate neighborhood level emergency preparedness and response, and what, if anything, Palo Alto Utilities might do about that. And for future discussion for UAC, to some degree piggybacking off Shoja's work that we just discussed. I've had after meeting with Director Batchelor and his staff in September, I had a few meetings with Lena Perkins, who spoke earlier tonight. And she and I also had a meeting with Ken Duker, who heads Office of Emergency Services, of course, in Palo Alto. So what I think would be best, and I would leave it to the chair, would be, perhaps in a future meeting, I could prepare a couple of slides to summarize what we've learned and, recommendations for discussion by UAC. But, I can describe it more verbally tonight, but it wasn't on the agenda. So I'm thinking perhaps do it at a future meeting.
Yeah, I think so. What we're about to get to future topics for upcoming meetings. And then as I've talked about before, the official mechanism for commissioners to put something on is to do a commissioner memo with another commissioner. So I guess there are a few different potential avenues. Usually in this section of commissioner comments, commissioners will just report that they went to such and such an event and sort of what was discussed there. And I don't know if maybe, but it sounds like you're actually wanting to make specific proposals for the city. So I agree, this is not the place for that. So let's just see if there's any other commissioners with reports from meetings and events. And then we'll transition to future topics.
Yeah, the one thing I would like to add is to, we can do it as future topic. I'd just like to thank Director Batchelor and Lena for her time. I know how busy everybody is, and the OES folks as well. So I really appreciate their time. And I think we, at least I learned a lot, and I think we can, make recommendations in the way that you said.
All right. Well, then why don't we go ahead and talk about future topics for upcoming meetings. Commissioner Johnston.
So just following up with the report that we heard tonight, I mean, one of the things that was mentioned was adding a second transmission line and the vulnerability that we have, and that all of our electrical transmission lines are now in a single corridor. And we've talked about it from time to time, but I don't think we've had a report recently about where those discussions stand. And it seems like, just for me, the report put additional emphasis on doing something about that. So I'd like to hear where we are on the second transmission line.
Commissioner Metz.
Yeah, I'd like to propose following up on resilience and emergency preparedness. This today addressed sort of how to electric and mixed homes respond, and I'd like to propose going beyond that in discussion in terms of what emergencies we need to be preparing for and what we need to be prepared to do in them. In other words, not what level of preparation is required, and then obviously get to the issues of what part of that is appropriate for Palo Alto Utilities.
Well, I'll say I'd be happy to look at your proposed slides offline and see where it would make sense to go next with that topic. Commissioners, anything else? I did have one thing that I wanted to see what you guys thought. We had the item on cybersecurity last month's meeting in closed session. And the next day there was a big article in the paper about a cybersecurity audit that sort of painted a different picture than we had gotten in our briefing. And I was wondering if there was interest in asking staff to revisit this topic. And also another thing that came up during our briefing was that it didn't feel as focused on utilities specifically as I think some of us had hoped. But I'm putting it out there as a question to commissioners, like if we're feeling done with cybersecurity, that's also, we might be feeling done with cybersecurity. Is there appetite to revisit it? Vice Chair Siegel.
Yeah, I would very much like to dig deeper and address some of the issues that were raised in the article.
Chair Counsel, so I've had some conversations with the director from IT, and we were willing to put something together for the January meeting, so we can have another closed session for that period to talk a little bit about some of the findings for the audit, and then also be a little bit more specific.
Director Batchelor, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Is that just me or is that others?
So I was mentioning that I've had conversations with the director from IT, and that we were planning on coming back in January with a closed session, and then to discuss some of the findings that were in the audit, as well as being a little bit more specific just from the utilities system of what those impacts might be. So we were
Sounds great.
In January.
Thank you. All right. Any other suggestions from commissioners? It's certainly fine if there are not. We have a list of topics on the rolling calendar to be scheduled. So, all right. Well, in that case, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. We don't usually vote, but thanks everybody. And thank you staff for great material tonight. Thank you members of the public who joined in, and whether listening or speaking, and thank you commissioners. We will see you all again in December. Also, council member Philseth. All right, take care everybody. Good night.
Thank you, commissioners.